Yeah, hi. Is this Rabbi Grossman?
Yeah. Hello.
Hey, how's it going in Minnesota?
Well, it's still cold in Minnesota.
So tell me about yourself. How you got to where you are now religiously?
Well, I started as a Christian. My father did not practice his faith. In fact, he never told me he was a Jew. I became a Christian about 1968, just before my 16th birthday.
Was this in Minnesota as well?
Yes. And I remember going to my uncle's house, and he was sitting reading a newspaper. And I was sitting in the room, and my father walked in the room, and he looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked back and just said, "Leave it alone. Just leave it alone." Well, I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought, what are you talking about? But maybe several weeks later, actually, I was grocery shopping. My first summer job, my first paycheck. And I thought, I'm going to go get some groceries and take them home and show my father that I can help with the family. So I went to the grocery store, went to the checkout stand, and this lady was ringing up all of my purchases. And there was this bag boy down at the end of the belt, a classmate of mine. And he was a weird duck because he was a skinhead before there were skinheads. He would walk around with a German stormtrooper helmet on and a trench coat, and he had this copy of Mein Kampf that he was always reading. I just thought he was a weird duck. So he was bagging groceries, except he wasn't bagging mine. They were just piling up at the end of the belt. So this lady, this clerk, turned to him and she said, "Would you please bag this man's groceries?" And he looked me right in the eye and he said, "I'm not bagging groceries for a goddamn Jew." Just like that. And I was shocked. I thought, what are you talking about? and so I said, "Well, okay, that's cool. Bag mine." And he said it again. "I'm not going to bag groceries for a goddamn Jew." So I went home and I talked to my father and I said, the strangest thing has happened to me. This kid just called me a goddamn Jew. And I looked him in the eye and I said, "Are we Jews?" And he just looked back at me and he said, "It's just best to let it go. Don't deal with it." So I did for a long time. I just didn't deal with it, I didn't do much about it, but I had this cousin who would drive me crazy. He would come and he would say to me, "We're Jews, And I would say, "I tell you what, you be a Jew, I'm Baptist, I'm fine with it, just leave me alone." Several years later, I came home from work one day and my routine was to come in the house, get a cup of coffee, get the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and my pack of Marlboros, and I would go sit in my chair and I would drink coffee and smoke several cigarettes and read the newspaper. So I'm sitting in the chair, I'm getting ready to read the newspaper, I have a cigarette lit, and I had to get up to go do something, and I came back and my paper was gone. And I said to my father, "Have you seen my paper?" And he said, "No, I haven't seen it." And I thought, well, darn, I wanted to read it. So I sat down, I'm smoking a cigarette, and I got up to throw something in the trash, and I went to look in the trash, and there was my newspaper in the trash. And I always read the Metro section first. It was my favorite part of the paper. So I took the Metro section, I opened it, and I'm reading the Metro section, and there is like a 2-page spread on Holocaust survivors. And they featured this guy, and his name was Eddie Grossman. You could see the tattoos. And so I looked at my father, and I said to him, "Is this what you did not want me to see?" And he said, "Yes, that's what I did not want you to see." Well, I didn't do anything. Still I didn't do anything about that heritage. I just kind of left it and went on being a Baptist. one Saturday, my cousin came to me and he said, I want you to come to this Messianic synagogue with me. And I said, okay, I'll go with you. I'll go to the synagogue, Messianic synagogue. It was in St. Paul. So I went with him, and it was okay. I mean, it was like I walked in, it was no big deal, but I walked into the synagogue and they were doing they were mixing. There was really Pentecostal service with Jewish trappings, and it was okay, but I wasn't overly impressed with it. And I came back home, and still I did nothing. And then my mother-in-law called one time. I can't remember if it was I think it was my birthday she called. And she said to my wife, what does Ron want for his birthday? And just, off the cuff, I said, I want a tallis and I want a kippah. So she went to the Jewish bookstore in Columbus. It's in Bexley. And she bought this beautiful, beautiful blue kippah with gold braid around the edge. And a really, really beautiful tallis. And she sent them to me. And I knew what they were when they came. I knew what she was sending. So instead of waiting, I just ripped it open and I took it into the bedroom. And I took the kippah and I put it on. And then I took the tallis and I wrapped myself in the tallis. And I had one of the most profound spiritual experiences in my life. It was like something just clicked. I suppose I would say I felt at a very deep spiritual level, I felt fulfilled. So I started to wear the kippah all of the time. I mean, every day I wore the kippah. And my family went nuts, and my the pastors in town, because I've been here a long time, 30 years, they all went nuts, and it was pretty intense. I mean, it was really intense. But I kept.
What year was this?
I think it was in the early 90s, like maybe 94, 93, 94, right in there.
Mm-hmm. I think it was the early 90s when the Messianic movement started becoming popular.
Yeah.
So mind you, the early Messianic Jews, like Jews for Jesus, I don't even think they wore kippot or talitot.
No, I don't think they did. But so I started to wear it all of the time then. And so for about 8 or 9 weeks, I went to Temple Israel in Duluth. I fell in love with it. I mean, it was beautiful. I loved the rabbi there. Her name was Amy Bernstein, and she was just so warm and friendly. And
it was a conservative show?
No. It was an amalgamation, actually. There were from Orthodox to Reconstructionist, because it was the only synagogue there in the city. So one day I walk in, Saturday morning, I'm coming in, I walk in, and I see this old bubby sitting in a pew. And she waves me over, and I go over and I sit with her, and we talk. And finally she says to me, "So tell me where you're from. Tell me what you do." I said, "No, I don't think I want to tell you what I do, not yet." And she gave me this look, and she said, "Tell you what, I'll tell you something about me, and then you can tell me about you." And she had me. So I said, "Fine." I agreed to it. And she looked me right in the eye, and she leaned over close, and she said, "My daughter manages a sex shop. Now, you tell me what you do." And so I looked at this old lady, and I said, "I'm a Baptist preacher." And she just went, she was just not happy at all with me that I was a Baptist preacher. But I kept going back.
You went to seminary as a Baptist?
Yep, I did.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And so I kept going back, and finally one day she said to me, what do you think of our rabbi? And I said, I think she's wonderful. And this old woman looked at me and she said, she's a lesbian. And I said, you're lying. And she said, no, it's true, she is. So all the way home, I'm angry with God. I'm so angry with him that he would lead me into this shul, into temple with this lesbian rabbi. But slowly the conviction grew for me that either I had to be Jewish or had to be Christian, because the Messianic thing was just not, it was not working for me at all. And I think the thing that got me to where I am right now is I sat down one day and I said to God, look, I want to read the Torah and I want you to help me read it like a Jew would read it. That's how I want to read it. I want to forget the Christian. I want to forget the Messianic. I want to sit down and I want to read this. I want to read the Torah as my father's people would have read it. Okay. So I did. I sat down and I began to read it that way. And so I read, for example, in Deuteronomy 24:16, no man can die for the sins of another man. Every man deals with his own sin. And then I read the Akedah. And, my whole life I had been taught that the lamb and the thicket, the whole thing, that was foreshadow of Jesus and penal substitution and everything. And I read it, and it just didn't come out that way for me. What I got out of it was God is saying to Abraham, no, I don't want you to sacrifice Isaac as an atonement. And he stops him. So then I went on and I read Ezekiel 18. And, if the father is unrighteous, but his son is righteous, does the son suffer from the unrighteousness of the father? And the answer is no. So then, once I got that concept in my mind, I couldn't accept the concept of original sin or the need for, the whole blood sacrifice thing, because it was an abomination. I mean, with Baal and with Moloch, and, it was all. So
how do you view Jesus now?
Well, I view Jesus as a preacher, teacher, not as God, not as the Messiah. There's just none of that. When I read Ezekiel and I read about the great prince coming through the eastern gate, and he brings Tikkun Olam, but he dies. He's mortal. He's literally the son of David. There is, from my reading, there's no divinity involved. So that's where I'm at.
Which branch of Judaism did you end up joining?
Well, I identify with Reconstructionism.
Can you explain what that is exactly?
Well, to me it is, Mordecai Kaplan said, and he was, I guess, the founder of Reconstructionism. Does
Reconstructionist Judaism accept patrilineal descent for proof of Jewishness?
Pardon?
Does the Reconstructionist movement accept patrilineal descent for proof of Jewishness?
Yeah, they do. When Rabbi Bernstein was Reconstructionist, we had a long talk about that. They do accept it. They do recognize it.
How do they differ from Reform?
How are they different? I think they're different in that I think that Reform is more, I guess I would say they're not as freewheeling. Okay. Let me see.
You mean they're more conservative or more traditionally conservative?
I think Reform leans at least in that direction. I don't think that Reconstructionism necessarily does that. My understanding of Reconstructionism is that each generation determines the significance of Torah in that generation. Okay, there's this constant reconstructing that goes on, this constant One of the things that Kaplan said is that the Judaism of Moses is not the Judaism of the prophets, which is not the Judaism of the sages, and it's not our Judaism. So there is this constant. One of the quotes that I love from Kaplan is that we hear the voices of our ancestors, but those voices must not overshadow our voices in our own generation. So there's this looking constant.
That's very similar to how Islam identifies itself. It claims to be a progression in revelation. In other words, they believe that every prophet or every character, I mean, they call every character in the Bible a prophet, brought a new message to their generation. And Muhammad just brought, in their opinion, the final message. How would Reconstructionist Judaism differ from that understanding? In my opinion, if you keep changing Judaism, you ultimately end up with something that doesn't resemble what you started out with. One could almost say that, according to that line of thinking, Judaism could ultimately destroy itself.
I think there's that danger. I mean, I think that could happen if there is not a respect, if we don't closely examine what past generations believed and why they believed it and carefully evaluate that, then I think you're right. I think you come to a point where anything goes, okay? And there's this self-dilution that takes place. I do think about that.
Wouldn't it be safer then to become a little more conservative with a little c than move so much to the left till you just fall off the page?
Yeah.
I think that what really distinguishes Orthodox and conservative, and even in some cases Reform, from Reconstructionists is that they're trying to align themselves or not depart from the path laid down by their ancestors. Orthodoxy more from a fundamental perspective and conservative more and Reform. But it seems that when you have a movement that accepts a lesbian rabbi, lesbianism is not prohibited in the Torah, but it is prohibited by the rabbis in the Talmud. It just seems that if you just keep tossing things away, how can you guarantee that your grandchildren will be Jewish or your great-grandchildren will be Jewish?
Sure.
It just seems that sometimes it's safer to stick with more conservative, more fundamentalist groups within Judaism just to preserve our values, which are ultimately biblical values. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it's kind of like the joke I heard, what do you call the grandchildren of Messianic Jews? You call them Christians. I think there is that danger that has to be guarded against. And I think about that a lot. That is not something that I take lightly, because at some point you can become so syncretic that you've lost your identity. And I do think that's an issue. So it's something that I struggle with.
What would you say are your biggest problems with Orthodoxy?
I listened to a teaching by Rabbi Zalman Schechter. He fascinates me. And he was talking with David Ingber from Romanu in Brooklyn, and also with Telushkin. Telushkin was kind of moderating the discussion. And it was really
Rabbi Schechter, he's the founder of Renewal Judaism. He passed away now. I think he was in Colorado, but he was excommunicated by Chabad because his ideas were not acceptable to what that movement believes.
But one of the things that Schechter said that struck me is, because they were talking about that whole renewal concept, and where it fits. And one of the things that he said was, I'm Orthodox, but I am not 1800s Orthodox or Middle Ages Orthodox. I'm, whatever the year was of the interview, 2013, I think. 2013 Orthodox.
I'm not really grounded in what Renewal Judaism stands for. I've always heard it was a more liberal form of Orthodoxy. I mean, similar to Open Orthodoxy, which is what's practiced by the YCT. In terms of Reform and conservative synagogues, there are more of them scattered outside of the larger Jewish community. Sometimes you just drive through America and find a Reform or conservative synagogue in a place where you would not have expected to find Jews. And I tell people, if they can't convert Orthodox, to at least go conservative. Walking with God really doesn't mean much if you're walking alone, and you got to have some sort of community. From what I've seen, what unites these liberal movements is almost a hatred for right-wing Orthodox rabbis. What they do is typically out of spite, like the women of the wall. The average woman of the wall there probably doesn't attend the kotel much. It seems like they're just doing it because they believe that a fight for equality within Orthodoxy is more important than daily ritual. Because, I mean, if it wasn't, they'd be doing the daily ritual and wouldn't only be fighting for Torah scrolls at the kotel just to upset the Orthodoxy or the status quo. In other words, it seems that they exist to spite the Orthodox. And I've attended, I remember when I was in Denver, there was a synagogue that was similar to this. It neither identified itself with Reform or conservative. It was called Kohelet. And it was very egalitarian, and people were very nice, but it seems that they didn't really stand for much, right? I mean, it's easy to say I stand for brotherly love and peace. I mean, all decent people stand for this, but I mean, the point of Judaism is to stand for Torah, to amplify Torah. You measure everything you do in this life back to the Torah. Instead of saying, oh, well, times change and I know better. And in some way Moses would understand, which is, I think, the basis for Reform and Reconstructionism. I never understood that, and this is something that's hard for Christians to understand. In Christianity, every movement believes that they're walking down the most authentic path. The Seventh-day Adventists think that Jesus would have endorsed their movement, and the Pentecostals believe that Jesus would have endorsed their movement. But that's not the difference between Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism. A Reform rabbi will admit that this is not what Moses initially endorsed, but times have changed, and the need for religion and a God has also evolved. This is something that I don't think has really reached Christianity. We see it a little bit within mainline Christians, Lutheran and Presbyterian. They also hire gay clergy now. Those strains of Christianity are pretty much dying.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it all has to go back to Torah. And I think there's continuity to that. I think that if you take the Torah and you begin to read it and you really endeavor to try to live it, then you're setting yourself apart from a lot of stuff that passes for spirituality and passes for religion. The whole concept of Leviticus 19. How do you treat for sojourners? How do you treat, immigrants? It's there's this whole solid construct that it has that sets you apart from a lot of other stuff, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I mean, I don't necessarily reject that. I think the thing that attracts me to Reconstructionism, though, is the ability to question and challenge and readjust.
But you do that in Orthodoxy. The thing is, people view groups like Chabad and ultra-religious Jews as the only Orthodoxy there is. So they think that my only alternatives are Reform or Chabad. And that's not the case. In places like Yeshiva University, more rational strains of Orthodox Judaism, you could absolutely question. You have to do your homework first, or you just can't reject something just because it's not comfortable. But, I mean, you could definitely question. And it's not that you have to dress in a certain way or you have to pray in a certain way. Judaism is a lot more colorful than that. It's not so rigid. And I understand that the reason that Reform, Renewal Judaism, and Reconstructionism exists is because of what these ultra-Orthodox Jews have done to Orthodoxy. They've made Orthodoxy look ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like most things in life, people usually fall into extremes when they're running away from something else. This is why, I don't even blame or condemn Christians, especially Messianic Jews. I think that the only reason they remain Christian is because Orthodox Jews don't take the time to try to explain Judaism correctly to them. Now, they have no problem about complaining about Christians and Messianic Jews trying to convert them, but they won't lift a finger to try to educate them properly.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting, the running away concept, because I remember thinking at one point, because Christianity was all I had known, really all I had known from the cradle. I can remember being in church at 4 years old. So at one point I remember thinking, if I do this, if I do the Ruth thing, and your God will be my God, and there was a point where I was entertaining the notion that the earth might swallow me. It was a very difficult thing for me to do, but I understand what you're saying.
I mean, I just want to see it continue. See, the thing is, I don't think the biggest fear is that your grandkids or great-grandkids would end up Christian. I think the biggest fear is that they may end up atheist or part of some radical group like ISIS, just because you didn't give them something solid, saying just love everyone and do what your heart tells you to do. I mean, that's typically just a road to nihilism. There's an old saying that if you don't stand up for something, you'll fall for anything. And as much as I disagree with many of the Orthodox rabbis nowadays, I consider that the best vehicle out there to get where we want to go. Although it has a lot of problems, if anything, I should encourage more people to become Orthodox to help fix those problems. If anyone has seen my videos, they know that I don't kowtow to the stupidity in Orthodoxy. I mean, I challenge these rabbis, and I show them that the rabbis in the Talmud would not agree with you. They would not agree to the behavior that takes place nowadays. Anyone who studies the Rambam knows that he was the great philosopher, the great rationalist. If you could see rabbis being dressed like 16th century Polish nobility, I mean, he would chastise them. Yeah, this is why, I don't support the reform movement or the Reconstructionist movement. Now, the conservative movement actually started off as an Orthodox movement. Now, that term Orthodox is probably less than 150 years old. It was created by the Reform to make fun of those who were more observant. But JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, was actually founded as an Orthodox institution. And then later on, it just moved more to the left. I think Madonna's a Reconstructionist Jew, right?
Yeah. I think that's right, although she confuses me because she was supposedly into Kabbalah for a while, so I don't know what she's...
Right. Well, I'm not a fan of Kabbalah either, but I don't think that Kabbalah is strictly an Orthodox thing.
So you're Orthodox?
I am Orthodox.
Yeah, okay.
I'm modern Orthodox. But what's the point of identifying as a Jew if you're not living by Torah? This is why I'm not big with people being identified by their last names. Oh, Grossman or whatever. I mean, I don't think that heritage means anything to God. I mean, it's belief and behavior. Our biggest enemies were Jews, from Moses Hess, Karl Marx. I'm not sure where you stand politically, but there are a lot of people.
You wouldn't like where I stand politically.
Okay. I'd rather it not get political, but there's a lot of people who have a Jewish heritage who don't represent our values. And even if you're on the left, I'm sure you feel the same way about Jews on the right. Right? So I don't think pedigree matters much to God.
I think that I would tend probably to agree with you on that point. I think that Torah has to be important. It has to be important. I'll give you an example. My wife was reading some historical novels one time, and she said, and it is Brock and Bodie Taney, and it deals with Zionism and the whole movement right up to Israel being established, modern day Israel being established and whatnot. So she's right in the middle of one of these books, and she says to me, she looks at me and she said, when are you going to do something about being a Jew? I said, well, I think if I start, you won't like it. And she thought about that for a minute, and then she said, no, I really do. I want you to do that. And I said, okay, so the first thing we're going to start to do is we're going to start to eat kosher. That's a starting point for us. And then there are other things after that that we have to do. Okay. So it was a progression for us, for me even, to begin to learn what it meant to be a Jew within the context of taking hold of Torah and then making a commitment before God to begin to live out Torah. Okay. So it was not something I could just say, okay, I think, blithely say, I think I'm going to be a Jew now. Because I knew there was more to it than that. There were principles laid down in the Torah, practicalities laid down in the Torah that I was going to have to embrace. Understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand perfectly. I mean, I converted. Although I took everything on all at once, really had to learn how to do it step by step, and it took a while. I mean, it's understandable. And there's a price to everything. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. Do you have a website?
Yeah, it's called Progressive Judaism. It's a Facebook page, and they can just...
Progressive Judaism, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, man. I appreciate it.
And I thank you for giving me the privilege of talking with you and doing this interview.